to our bootcamp. We'll be going over the product requirements document, or the PRD, day 2, and this will focus on the product roadmaps plus the second part of the project. So recap, what's a PRD? It's pretty much a document that is used to outline the product and features to be delivered to the client, and it should be sent and reviewed by both the client and the project team and to be revised as the product is built. So this is something you'll work on right after you meet with the nonprofit, create it, and throughout the dev process, you'll continuously update it with the timeline and just like any questions or features that may be added or deleted. And these are the sections of the PRD, and we've already covered the first few, so today we'll be going over the last 7 sections. The first one's user journey, and this focuses on how the user interacts with the product. So pretty much it's the process that the user goes through around and involving the product. And it's pretty much talking about the user's needs and problems and explaining it into like a user journey and how pretty much their issue relates to them using your product. And it's a timeline of user actions. And it's typically made by either product managers and combined with the user design experience, web design, user-centered design, all the components of UX, UI design. And here's an example of a user journey. So it kind of, you are similar making user stories. It kind of expands on that, provides more information. So it's pretty much creating a sample user in the context of which they would use your product. So for this one, you have user persona number 1, who is Bob, and he's around a middle-aged man with a non-technical background. And in the context of nonprofits, it's pretty much saying like, oh, he works with the director of a nonprofit, uses volunteers heavily, and he found it increasingly difficult to keep track of his people, especially across his different events, locations, and needed skills. He has all of his volunteers on an Excel spreadsheet, but isn't familiar with how to perform any complex task on it. Bob wants to email a certain group of people about a volunteer opportunity he has, as he doesn't want to bother his entire mailing list with an email that may not apply to them. He wants the opportunity to be targeted towards a college-aged people in Johns Creek and people who indicated they were interested in art. So pretty much like looking at his user story, this is something you may talk to a nonprofit, hear their pain points, and pretty much summarizing it up, the goal is to email a subset of the volunteers about a particular opportunity. So pretty much as you're talking to the nonprofit, you'll figure out their use cases and combine it into a sample user. And building off of that, we have a user journey map, and it pretty much combines the user journey into a nice map that relays the different steps of the process. And it provides a deeper analysis of when and where the user can benefit from your product or service. And it allows you to best discover how you can best intervene, because maybe some parts of the product, they're neutrally, some are like really negative and they really need it fixed. So I kind of made a sample user journey with Instagram. So like, what's a pain point? Let's say Kylie Jenner wants to spread word about her cosmetics brand. And she needs to advertise, but she has to pay YouTube lots of money for an advertisement. And how does the user interact with it? She must contact YouTube, post ad contact, pay lots of money. And this channel is through an online video platform. And that's slightly neutral, like it's annoying, but not that, not super. But let's say step 2, she wants to release a new product and she wants to spread events. And she wants to have a huge event and have people come over, view the product. And she must spread this like through word of mouth, maybe an emailing list. And that's a negative experience. So through that, you'd figure out all these negative emotions and figure out, okay, we need a social media platform where producers, artists can like post information to a wide variety of fans. So that's kind of like a user journey map in a fun context. And you'll be doing something similar for Spotify. So just wanted to have an example. Building off of that, so it's a user flow diagram, which also talks about the design process. And it's pretty much a series of steps taken by the user to achieve a specific goal. So while the user journey talks about the goal that needs to be reached, this breaks it down into a series of steps. And this will help create like a visual tool pretty much. And a nice recommended tool is Lucidchart, and that will be linked in the PM notes. And this is an intermediate step before wireframes, which is more nicely drawn out. And as you can see, this is an example. You kind of have squares describing the process. So let's say you want someone to log in or sign up. You'll initially start off with like a square for logging in or signing up. And then you kind of say the journey, like they click on the page. It says, if you're already signed up, then just enter email address, password, you log in. If not, you want to click set up your free account, enter name, and then you go into entering email address and password. And it kind of shows the user flow. So if you're creating like a volunteer management site, you would have like the login or sign up, and then you would go to.
Sorry, I was checking if it was recording.
Yeah, Yeah, you would go to like the volunteer management site, you would click login, and then you would go to the calendar and see if you're scheduled. So that's kind of like a series of steps. And this is something like also the PM would be involved in. And then the next part is wireframes. And this is something designers do, but I just wanted to mention it since it will be part of the PRD, but you won't be working on it. So it's pretty much a high level overview of the process users will take, similar to the diagram, but it actually has the UI kind of roughly sketched out. So as an example, previously we had the login and the sign up. This has what it would actually look like on a phone. So it has like the kind of the logo, the boxes, but it's also not super defined. And that's like a really key component we were learning about in our class. If you make a really nice detailed model and you show it to someone and ask for feedback, they'll be afraid to give you criticism because they'll be like, oh, you invested so heavily in it that they'll say, oh, we love it. But if you make like a nice rough sketch, like the last one, thank you for registering, you could do that in like under 2 minutes. And if someone says, we hate it, like you won't be offended, you can make another one in 2 minutes. So I think that's the importance of wireframes, to get like really nice constructive feedback that people are willing to give because it didn't take too much time and effort. So a recap, these are kind of like the steps of designing the user process. So the user journey is kind of describing the user itself and their goal in using your product. The user flow describes the series of steps they take using your product. And finally, the wireframe is like a visual of those series of steps in like a skeletal UI framework that isn't too specific, but it's enough detail that people can give you constructive criticism. Does anyone have any questions? Have you heard of any of this before? Just reference, yeah.
No, so just well shown.
Okay. Cool. The next part of it, after kind of the design phase, is the development timeline. And this kind of works with the features, the components you created to create a timeline of the product. And this is really important to do because then you'll know if you're on track, if you're behind schedule, if you're on schedule. Because if you don't have any timeline, you'll just start doing stuff, and at the end realize you're way behind and have to cram, which is slightly what happened last year. And you want to make sure none of you have to go through that process and have like really nice, clear like goals, because that makes it so much easier to meet goals if you have them. So for making the product timeline, some technical knowledge is required. And the goal right now, it's okay if you're not like exactly sure, like, oh, how long does it take to make a login screen? That kind of like varies by team, varies by user, and that's what you'll talk like. You can make a rough timeline and like approximate these steps. And then after you meet with your nonprofit, you'll be paired with a tech lead who can give you more accurate guidance on like exactly how long stuff will take. And this should be like clearly communicated. You can update this throughout the process. And it's really important that the team knows the timeline too, so everyone stays on track. And yeah, and it includes the date of completion for every feature, and specifically those on the minimal viable product, because that needs to be made sure to be completed for the nonprofit. So like going off Instagram, let's say if you divide it into 4 sprints and you want to release your minimal viable product where you can have a post, you can have hashtags, like, comment, and like tag people. So the first step, let's say you want to create the post with the image and the description. And that's what you'll like work on the first week. The next week, you'll add hashtags, and you'll also add like searching by hashtag for the images. Then week 3 to have like the likes and the comments added. And finally, week 4, they'll allow you to follow people so that way you can see their feed, also tag people so they can see like connections between people. So it's like a rough timeline. And then typically you want to leave padding like a week or 2 for testing at the end. That's like a really good practice. And if you ever fall behind, then you have the cushion at the end to go forward with it. And then finally, like one more part is the design resources. And this is a part of the PRD. I just wanted to mention it because it's on the sample one. This is something the designer will work on, and this happens throughout the development process. And it pretty much links to Figma or other UI frameworks, but Figma is one of the main ones where before how you were creating the app and it was like really roughly drawn out. This allows you to make like really nice detailed UI. And it's like just a place for you to link it to the Figma. And that way you can see throughout the process all the nice UI resources in one spot. And finally, I keep saying finally, but there's 2 more slides at the end. Just wanted to mention the contact info. Pretty much it's optional for now, but like at the end, you'll want to put your name and then also like the contact info for the PM, the tech lead, and the designer. So that way, if you share this with your nonprofit, they know who to contact if there's any questions. And also questions is like a nice spot if the nonprofit asks questions and you need to ask your team or your team asks, then you need to ask the nonprofit just to keep track of pending questions that need to be addressed. Cool. Is there any questions?
Yeah, so the whole PRD,
Mhm.
would it be, do we keep it in Notion? Or would we potentially like make it into some kind of doc that we share with our clients?
Yeah, so you can share the Notion with your clients. That's what we did typically with a nonprofit. We had them like sign like or look over a user agreement, and that was on Notion.
Okay,
So
and do you find that it works well to like go over it with them to kind of back them along, or?
yeah, I think it would be really good. I think when nonprofits like love to be updated on what you're doing. So maybe like meet with them, write the PRD, and then before you start development, say like, oh, is this what you're looking for? I think that'd be like really good. And also, like during you might meet with them and still have a very rough outline of what they want, or like like these are the three main features. And then as you start working on them, that was like, oh, I have way more questions. So it's always like good to like talk to them about the PRD and make sure it's like updated.
Does the PRD like, we don't make it at the beginning of the sleep, but we like continually
Mhm.
update it?
Yeah. Anything else? Well, let me know if anything else comes up. And then so for this part of the PRD, we'll be working on the main like 3 user components and the development timeline. So going off your previous PRD where you define some features, expand on them, and also your user stories to create a user journey, the user journey map, and the user flow diagram. And it doesn't have to be like for the whole set, but just like pick a specific feature and create for 2 different features, these user journey map and diagram, and finally development timeline. So for all the features you specified, I think like relatively compared to each other, see how much it would take and try to create like a rough timeline of how long you think they would take. And then next bootcamp meeting, we'll go over it and see, compare like everyone's estimates and see how they relate to each other. And the resources tips, continue the PRD on the first page you had, just continue building on it, and then DM it to Maggie when you're done. And we'll also create like a similar like link where everyone can look at it at the next meeting. You weren't here, but we all like took a look and like left comments and feedback. So yeah, it's the goal for Monday. And any questions? No. Well, yeah, that was the meeting. Thank you so much.
And yeah, just to reiterate, you don't need to make wireframes. That's communicated with the designer and they'll send you the link or like any screenshots. So for the project, just leave that blank. But just be aware for the actual PRD, you would have to communicate with them for it. And
Can they, on Notion, can they edit a doc too?
There's
You know
share
how
settings
you
on
type in
Notion.
something, like, can they
Oh, like,
just
can
plop
they-
the picture in or whatever?
like to have them be able to edit it. Yeah, so there's options for in Notion, kind of like Google Docs, where you can choose like, oh, you can view only or edit only. So yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Let us know if you have any more questions. in Notion
Yeah, it's
too.
at the top right. There's a little
Mhm.
section.
And then what else do we, from here, what's the next, like, the timeline thing?
Yeah.
After we do the Spotify, what do we do next?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So next boot camp, we'll be dedicating some time to review it, go over any final like recommendations for each other's PRD. And then we'll also be spending time looking through OKRs, which is another form of success metrics you can apply to help team management and is also like really good practice of just like navigating how to improve one's performance. And then after that would be our second general meeting. So we won't have boot camp, but instead that is when we'll be introducing all of our nonprofits and you'll be kind of, looking through like what their mission are, what they're hoping to tackle. And in that meeting, you should also keep note of like, oh, who are your like top interests of who you want to work with? Because after that, we will send out a form where you select your interests and then pair the PMs before any of the other members. So you will be interacting with the nonprofits first. And that meeting after boot camp, we will kind of go more in depth of what the first call with the nonprofit should be like. And so you won't have like no script to base on. So you'll have like be a little more comfortable and also kind of going over the overview of the product development timeline and kind of how the rest of the quarter will go and what your responsibilities again should be with your team. And I think that's kind of it.
Yeah. Then you'll get your nonprofit
Yeah.
and then call them. So
A team too, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a bit after. And then like ideally before any development.
Sorry,
No.
do they like choose team, like, do they preference also?
yeah, so
Yeah.
they also preference it like during the nonprofit as well.
Mhm. Yeah, you guys just get your decisions earlier.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because it's really important to get the PRD first before any
Show up to the
development.
first meeting like, oh, I have no plan. for
Yeah.
you guys."
Yeah.
exactly. And then, oh yeah, that's also another thing I wanted to mention. So the PRD in the development timeline, or AKA the product roadmap, sorry. You are like kind of giving a rough timeline before any development starts. And of course, like kind of guesstimating the timeline might like be a little like rough, and definitely look at the examples in the past from last year. But it's really crucial to, once you establish the PRD, to check with the engineers, aka get feedback from the tech lead after developing timeline to make sure it's realistic. And again, during development, if the timelines can actually be met, it shouldn't really be like you enforcing like, oh, this needs to be done by this date. It should really be like, oh, like to the engineers, like, do you think like this is still like reasonable, like should be adjusted, and then adjust it based on them, because developers are trying their best. So, and then the PRD should again be constantly revised during development. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. of course. And please let us know if you have any more questions. But this second part of the PRD will be due Monday before boot camp.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Cool.
sounds good.
Hope you get to